here has heard of some terms like career readiness, the school to work pipeline, or the Common Core? Just show of hands. Who's heard of some of those things? Yep. So you already know a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. Who's familiar with names like Bill Gates, the Walton family, and the Koch brothers? Of course you are. The question today is, who's aware of how closely these terms and these names are tied together? That's what we're going to be diving into today. I'm up there. Okay. I'm going to outline one of the major problems that higher education is facing, and my colleagues are going to dive deeper into some particular aspects of that. You'll hear after me from Professor Japtok, who's going to give a specific example of how higher education is being infiltrated by corporate thinking. After him, Professor Laughlin's going to detail where the money is going, since it's going less and less into public education. And finally, Professor Lienhart is going to show us how this takeover is happening, including the strategies and motives. But before we get to them, let's look at the function of public education. And take a minute just to think for yourself what this means to you. What's your answer? What is the function of public education? Who wants to share just a one-sentence answer to that? Just some thoughts on what it's supposed to do. Go ahead.
Prepare you for college.
Prepare you for college. What else?
Give you a certain amount of skills that you need to further yourself in life.
Okay. What else? Is anybody?
Be able to function in society.
Okay. Good. All right. So, you know, we all believe in different parts of education and what it's supposed to be doing, but deciding on the function of education is part of the democratic process. One of the reasons we often refer to public education as the cornerstone of democracy is because the people agree and decide on what they want out of education. And over time, we've come to value ideas such as this. And what Dr. King said here was that the function is to teach how to think. The function of education is to teach how to think, but thinking intensively and critically isn't an activity just limited to the classroom, is it? Is it only about getting ready to go get to the next step? Is it only about getting ready to go to college or getting ready for your career? You want to learn how to be critical, analytical thinkers. You can probably relate a little bit to Dewey's idea here as well. Dewey was the predominant early childhood educator in the late 18th, early 19th centuries, known as the founder of pragmatism, which was encouraging children to learn in the environment in which they were. So like encouraging them to actually learn while they were playing or while they were doing chores. He did not create the Dewey Decimal System. That was someone else. So Martin Luther King Jr. and Dewey's ideas here that education is a universal, a lifelong process has been our educational foundation. And here in our state, we've been really, really fortunate that that was extended into the California Master Plan for Higher Education. Raise your hand if you've heard of the Master Plan for Higher Education. You're actually participating in it right now. Established in 1960, it is the system that was created among the University of California, the Cal States, and the community colleges, creating access to higher education for all Californians who wanted it. So over the last several years, we've been in a battle between these really beautiful ideas here and what we've been looking at as the corporate takeover of public education. On the corporate takeover side of this battle are this really powerful group of self-proclaimed education reformers. And whenever you use that term, I'd like you all to do this, because the reform sounds really progressive. It's really not. These are people who are inspired by the market potential of education. It's financed by billionaire philanthropists like the Gates Foundation, the Walton family, and the Koch brothers. There's a whole lot more. Those are the real obvious names. They believe that the purpose of education is to prepare children for a labor market by teaching them a common core of subjects, which narrowly focuses on English and math. They're into measuring student proficiency by standardized tests. And they're also focusing on preparing children as young as kindergarten to work on being college and career ready. Doesn't that sound like fun when you're 5? To start thinking about being college and career ready? And then on the other side of this battle are groups like the badass teachers, the teachers' unions, and organizations like United Opt-out and the Network for Public Education. And their focus for education is that schools should be preparing children to be active participants in democracy while providing them a potentially life-changing experience. That students should be engaged in creating their own voices through critical reflection and thinking. And these groups, we believe in high standards, but we don't believe in reducing educational achievement to a standard curriculum or measuring what they've learned by standardized tests. You know, considering these two models, these two different sides, and what they're going to produce as members of society, who do you want for your neighbor? So the education reformers endorse a very STEM-based education while totally dismantling the liberal arts, the performing arts, the manual arts, the visual arts. And you've already noticed a loss of these in your schools, right? The education reformers, they're seemingly taking us back to these Roman times where the arts and creativity were available only to the leisure and the ruling classes, while the rest of society is sort of forced into these production forces. While the other side, ours, is all for people working in science, technology, engineering, and math, when that's what an individual is passionate about. But it's the limiting and the prioritizing of the curriculum that's a real concern. Because we all have talents that could and should be expressed in our work, but we don't want a society that only focuses on the production without the learning. We need the comedians and the chefs and the poets. Article 27 of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts, and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. So lifelong learning, critical thinking, and the arts are beneficial to society. In fact, that's such a universal belief that that's why the public originally agreed to pay for public education, because an educated population is what's best for everyone. These rights, lifelong learning, critical thinking, access to the arts, they form our history. And from great thinkers and musicians to folk artists, every cultural shift is reflected in art and writings. Without this history, we don't have anything to build on. Without artistic expression and critical thinking, everything is whittled down to function and efficiency. Everything becomes the same. And what does that lack of individuality get us? It gets us societies like North Korea, which represents something we literally war against. So why is this happening? It's happening because there's an enormous amount of money at stake. Public education in this country has been financially valued as a $650 billion a year market share. Good education is really costly, and by its very nature, education is not particularly efficient. But the corporate mentality views it as something to streamline to get the best return on investment. And in doing that, the reformers focus on making education more efficient via terms and ideologies like these. Driven by those that want to monetize our educational system, it's changing higher education specifically by forever modifying the scope and the landscape of the California Master Plan for Higher Education. It's centralizing control of community colleges in big, tangled bureaucracies. It's eventually imposing assessments driven by for-profit corporations, not by the best interest of students. It's limiting the definition of success to college and career ready, which ignores the many ways community colleges contribute to a really diverse population, like English language learners and older adults and other non-degree programs. And it's limiting the number and the amount of times a student can take a class. You can repeat a class no more than 2 times. That absolutely flies in the face of ideas like Dewey's and lifelong learning. So what are we doing? As we remove teaching the arts and teaching critical thinking from our classrooms, we've got to look ahead and ask ourselves, is it going to be worth it? How costly is that going to be? And next, Dr. Japtok's going to look into an aspect of that.
Hey there. So I'll be focusing primarily on the role that educational technology plays in this corporate takeover of public education. So despite the ongoing wave of privatizations and the commercialization of almost every area of life, public education dollars do not as of yet flow in their entirety into private coffers. A truly aggravating fact that corporations, hedge funds, and investors have set out to change. The term they've shrewdly adopted to convince the rest of us of their worthy goal is, and we've heard it already, education reform. While technology does not represent the only path to privatization, and while some for-profit colleges have campuses, technology represents maybe the most potent weapon in the attempt at a corporate takeover of public education. And it's a most insidious weapon, since we love technology so much that we blind ourselves both to some of its implications and the intentions of its purveyors. Now, educational institutions themselves have to share the blame for a cultural climate in which corporations get to determine how and by whom the nation's students should be educated. In December 2008, just at the beginning of the economic crisis, university presidents from around the nation wrote a public letter to President Obama in which they assured him that, and I quote, "Leaders of the country's public higher education sector are committed to create a long-term plan to serve the nation by enhancing public universities' critical role in creating jobs, increasing graduates, enhancing the quality and skills of the workforce, and assisting in national technology and energy initiatives through research." I suppose that made it official. We are now only an economy, nothing else. Not a culture, not a democracy, just an economy. And since public education should primarily serve the economy, as we're told, why not go a little step further? Let public education be a major source of profit for private business. And indeed, the government has been more than willing to lend a helping hand in this regard. An eye-opening 2011 policy paper by the President's Council of Economic Advisors reveals how much in line corporate and governmental views of the future of education are. Entitled, "Unleashing the Potential of Educational Technology," The paper starts out by admitting to significant challenges in bringing educational technology products to market, since market fragmentation creates barriers to entry. But never fear, help is on the way, as the paper rejoices that the spread of broadband internet and Common Core state standards have improved the landscape for educational technologies. The payoff in the form of more effective and more widely utilized educational technologies could be enormous, end of quote. Now, the payoff metaphor may not be fortuitous in a paper concerning the future of public education, but it's hardly an accident. Right? So the paper goes on to bemoan that anyone selling educational technology has to deal with an annoying number of people involved in such decisions. And indeed, democracy is so very cumbersome. So wouldn't it be better for the government to simply create an environment ideal for the sellers of educational technology? And lo and behold, as the paper tells us, for the K-12 sector, that goal has been reached. Quote, the widespread acceptance of Common Core state standards represent a major step towards resolving disagreements over learning objectives that have been an obstacle to the development of broadly applicable educational technologies. Now, reading such a position paper, one cannot help but wonder what drives what. Is educational policy guided by the best interests of the society, or do the interests of mega corporations drive education policy? Take a wild guess. Right? So the money pie various corporations are currently fighting about boggles the mind, which is, of course, why significant resources have been devoted to capture the education market. Let's briefly look at some more numbers here. So as you can see here, 21 billion in 2013 technology expenditures in school, and that's excluding higher education, right? And the growth margins expected are just phenomenal. I mean, 15-fold over the next 10 years. So that's what's at stake here. So not only the federal government, but state legislatures as well have been only too happy to provide access to the enormous number of tax dollars represented by public education. By 2011, Idaho, Alabama, Michigan, and, of course, Florida all required that high school students complete online courses on components of courses for graduation. These inroads into the K-12 sector are just the beginning, however. Public higher education is a target as well. Now, one approach for undercutting public higher education consists of offering standalone online courses for which accreditation hurdles are not as high, and then market such courses to students. And a number of big players in the education market have joined this race. The University of Phoenix and Kaplan University are among the better-known providers of online education, and I'm sure you've all heard of them. And after a crash of corporate profits following the publication of very low graduation rates and predatory practices in regard to student loan recipients, and the fact that they spent much of their money on marketing, they're quickly regrouped. The Campaign for the Future of Higher Education quotes one of the masters of this strategy, Randy Best, as saying that public universities' brands are the gold standard around the world. And thus, the University of Phoenix announced that it would enter new partnerships with more than 100 community colleges in 2013. As Greg Bass-Brown, a business analyst, has argued, as costs continue to mount in higher education, online courses will undoubtedly appeal to cash-strapped students looking to dodge a lifetime of debt. Furthermore, as governments continue to scrabble for money in the ongoing financial stalemate, other forms of income may dry up, leading to some universities running out of gas. Coursera and its peers see this on the horizon. Now, undeterred by the doubtful efficacy of online learning for most students and the very real possibility that it may undermine the mission of higher public education in general, and of community colleges in particular, Paulo Blickstein, director of the Transformative Learning Technologies Lab at Stanford, argues that in the age of information, everything can be customized, and the last frontier is education. And James Lerman agrees that learning facts becomes less important than knowing how to find and use them. It is difficult to see, however, how that proposition has changed from the age of books. Information has been available in libraries for the past 500 years, Yet it has remained important to actually have facts and knowledge in one's head, since one cannot think about any new bit of information if one does not have an internal context for it. The arrival of the internet has changed nothing in that regard. One still has to have curiosity, patience, self-discipline, and self-motivation to acquire knowledge. And I welcome you to come up with your own internal estimate as to what percentage of community college students could be described in these terms. Why would one expect students that have avoided libraries to suddenly burn with desire for knowledge online? Now, why should we care whether education, both in the K-12 system and in higher education, remains public or not? Let me suggest a few reasons why we should. For one, the corporate takeover threatens one of the few truly public spheres left. Already as early as 1989, Herbert Schiller, in an important book entitled Culture Incorporated, The Corporate Takeover of Public Expression, warned that there were fewer and fewer spaces in which citizens can freely exchange ideas without subtle or not so subtle censorship by conglomerates. In many cities, there's no public life outside malls. I mean, San Marcos is a classic example, right? And malls are private space. Festivals, museums, and exhibits are all sponsored or co-sponsored by large corporations. And the media, from TV to newspaper to radio and the internet, have almost been entirely captured by a few gigantic corporations. As Johanna Beaches has said, with the move to online learning, another massive expropriation of social space will have succeeded. And this will not happen because online learning is better. It will happen because it's yet another way to guarantee profits. Now, K-12 and higher education are supposed to create a common good, an educated, knowledgeable populace that allows a society to thrive and has the ability to confront challenges to that society as well. The way we're going, Brian McKenna rightly projects into the future that what we are witnessing is the collapse of the public sphere caused by the transformation of public education into an e-learning industrial academic complex. Now, all this might strike you as unreasonably alarmist, and I'd be happy to find out that those who fear the corporatized future are wrong. But what if they're not? Neil Postman has taught us that every technology has an inbuilt bias. The inherent bias of computer technology is a move toward ever-increasing automation, or, to be more precise, software mediation. Wherever humans decide to put computers, those computers replace human work. In some cases, that's all for the good, and so most of the time we've been led to cheer when that's happened. But we are reaching a critical point at which our cheering should stop. Matter of fact, it should have stopped some time ago. In education, the trend towards automation started with standardized testing. More or less simultaneously, TVs and then VCRs entered classrooms, preparing us for the eventual arrival of the computer and the idea that machines could play a prominent role in instruction. Then came online courses, online degrees, and then MOOCs, the massive open online communities. You've heard of those, right? And course software packages that even do grading. It should be clear to everyone where this trend is leading. Let us not forget that at the height of the budget crisis in California in 2012, Darrell Steinberg, the California Senate president, was ready to push through MOOCs with full college credit when MOOCs had barely been tested. Investors are licking their chops at the idea of automating higher education, in the process of which faculty would become quite expendable and could serve as cheaply paid teaching assistants. Now, rich kids, of course, would continue to be taught by professors. To the masses, electronic instruction would be sold as the coolest thing ever. And wouldn't everyone love it? No more classes, no more colleges, just hanging out on the beach and learning on a laptop. Now that's how great minds are created. Right? So maybe I'm just cranky, and everyone loves a techno-optimist after all. But does anyone believe that when Apple first donated its computers to schools, its motivation was boundless generosity? Administrators, teachers, students, and parents alike glowed with gratitude, but they did not recognize that they'd also wheeled a Trojan horse into the classroom. Already by the 1970s, Joseph Weizenbaum, one of the pioneers of artificial intelligence, became alarmed by what he saw as the computer's growing cultural domination, and came to believe that all projects that substitute a computer system for a human function that involved interpersonal respect, understanding, and love should be banned. We cannot expect to live in a humane world if we are not willing any longer to do the work humans do. Education is among the most basic kinds of work that we do. Humans need to teach other humans how to be human. An education system that wants to call itself such needs to say public and in a classroom to ensure that that is what continues to happen. Thanks. And now, Teresa.
Me. So I'm going to ask the students here in this room, why are you getting a formal education? How does it benefit you? Don't make me call on you, because you know I will.
Job pays you more with degrees.
What's that?
A job pays you more for a degree.
That's right. You're going to get paid more, for sure. You're going to get paid for more. And if you Google returns to investment or returns to education, you're going to see thousands of charts like this, that you're going to get paid more. You're going to get paid more, you're going to have a higher income, you're going to have a better standard of living, you're going to participate more in the marketplace, you're not going to go to jail in the same numbers, and you're not going to be unemployed in the same numbers as people who don't get an education. So good on you, thank you for that. And that benefits you, but it also benefits society. And for those of you who are economists or students of economics, you know that you have heard about the external benefits of education. And external benefits of education are things like having adequate numbers of professionals, such as doctors, nurses, and accountants, to help us with our daily needs. Having higher tax revenues, lower welfare costs, lower prisons rates, and having critical thinking and a better educated populace, which is better for the democracy. Now you think about this and you think, well, that's all fine and good, but how do you actually quantify those external benefits? These external benefits actually can be quantified. Here is the result of a study done by an economist, Walter McMahon, from the University of Illinois in 2010. McMahon quantified the external benefits of education, and this is the benefit each college graduate. This is above the benefit that the individual receives. So this is the benefit to society of your education. It works out to be $12,558 per year. That's the annual benefit. Over a lifetime, that's about $750,000, $750,000. That's why in many countries in Europe, Germany, Sweden, etc., they make education free. Not only do they make education free, but they would provide you with a stipend to live and to help buy your books and that sort of thing. Sounds good, huh? Right? And frankly, that was the plan in California. In California, we were supposed to not have any tuition. Oh, I'm supposed to stand here by this microphone, sorry. We were not supposed to have tuition. It was supposed to be free to everybody. That was the idea. That's why instead of tuition, the UCs and the Cal States will call them student fees instead of tuition. But really, it's tuition. So we have shifted the burden from the state, from people like me who pay taxes in the state, to people like you who are getting the education. The master plan created the community college system, the state college system, and then the university system. They differentiated. They said at the community college, you'd get your first 2 years. At the state, you'd get your second 2 years of college plus maybe a master's degree. And at the UC, that would be a primarily research organization where you could get your PhD. Now, you could do everything at the UC as well, but that was sort of the idea. So that people without resources, people who had difficulty paying for education could start at the community college and get their under lower division requirements in. The California higher education was the envy of the world in the 50s and the 60s. And then Prop 13 passed. And those of you who are young, which most of you are young, too young to remember this, you probably have still heard people talk about Prop 13 because it was devastating to education. Proposition 13 was a proposition on the California ballot that passed in 1978 that decimated spending for higher education. Prop 13 capped property tax at the assessed value when sold. So when I bought my house in, I can't even remember when it was, 1998 in Carlsbad, I bought it for a lot less than my neighbors who bought it just last year, right? I mean, the property values have gone up a lot from 1998 to 2014. So I pay taxes at a much lower rate than my neighbors do, even though our houses are very similar. So it was, you only pay taxes at the assessed value, and then it's raised by 2% each year. When Proposition 13 passed in 1978, it was originally sold to voters as a protection for homeowners, and it was. It helped ensure lower taxes for average Californians and older people on fixed incomes. But because of the tax loophole, commercial property can avoid reassessment. So if I have a business and I sell it to somebody, it does not get reassessed up to the market value. And therefore, businesses end up paying less in taxes. The biggest beneficiaries of Prop 13 are large companies and corporate landholders who use tax loopholes to avoid paying property taxes. But what it did to education is that so much of the funding from education came from the property taxes, the local property taxes in the area. So when those property tax revenues basically collapsed, then the money had to come from the state in terms of general apportionment. That means that the power of what they were going to teach and local control was lost. And mostly it meant that the revenues to the schools went way down. You can see here, let me see if I can find it here. This is not the prettiest graph, but you can see here, this is the rest of the United States and this is California. We have 1978, look at that drop. So you can imagine how devastating it was. Can you see that little arrow right there and right there? That's a huge drop in terms of education spending. And this trend, it continues to today. You can see the United States, this is the blue line, and California is the red line. We're well below United States spending. We're 49th in the district, in the country. So our priorities have shifted. Instead of a strong, sustained public investment in education at all levels, paying for education because it helps the good of the nation, we have shifted the burden of higher education to the student. In addition, more public dollars in terms of the GI Bill and grants are going to private for-profit colleges. The for-profit colleges, oh, here's another one, I'm sorry. This one's kind of an interesting one. This is the slide that really bothers me, because my parents were willing to pay 5.6% of their income in California to put me and my cohort through college. And my generation is only willing to spend 4.4% of our personal income to put you guys through college. So I apologize for my generation. I'm just saying it right now. But really, it's really annoying. So our for-profit colleges, where it's going. The for-profit colleges like the University of Phoenix or ITT Tech are coming under intense scrutiny by the federal government and the public alike, for good reason. Many of these they use predatory practices in recruitment to exploit students, especially those from low-income backgrounds. Promise you a quick education and charge you a bunch for it, and then you get a degree that isn't worth as much. So be careful. The gain for them is a huge pile of money paid for by students with student loans for tuition, and there is no guarantee return on investment in terms of acquired skills or job opportunities. The draw of these for-profit colleges is that they make it easy to get a degree with flexible schedules. You've seen that ad on TV of National University. I love that guy's voice. You can still learn in a month. You've heard that one? I love that guy's voice. You know how much those spots cost? A boatload. They're spending a lot of money on directed advertisements for you to take classes. Now, National University is a nonprofit, so it's not a for-profit college, but it's the same idea. Let's make a very, very simple, easy way to grab students in so we can grab that money. They make it easy for you to get a degree, but the degrees aren't always the best. However, so let's talk about completion rates. 22% of full-time students seeking a bachelor's degree completed their course study. 22% in a for-profit college compared to 55% at a public institution and 65% at private nonprofit. So 22% actually completed in the for-profit colleges. They got their BA. 55 at public institutions, 65 at private nonprofits. Some of those private nonprofits are things like Harvard and Yale, Stanford. So there's kind of an incentive to finish that, unless you're Bill Gates, and then you're making so much money you don't need to finish college. The average tuition for a for-profit college is 6 times higher than a community college and twice as high as a public 4-year college. To fund this education, 96% of for-profit students take out loans, which haunt them after college. You can see here more for-private college graduates default on their student loans than other graduates, 21.8% compared to 13% at public universities and 8.2% at private nonprofit colleges. You can default on your student loans, but you can never declare bankruptcy and get out from under them. Somebody will pay for them. Despite accounting for only 11% of the federal loan borrowers, for-profit students comprise nearly 50% of the loan defaulters. So you get a degree, it's not worth that much, it's hard to find a good job, you have these huge debt burdens, and then you're in trouble. The business model for for-profit schools is clearly to use up a student's allotment of federal aid. Roughly 86% of their revenue comes from federal aid. There are other profits coming from the GI Bill. In 2012 alone, one of the largest for-profit college companies, Corinthian Colleges, received $186 million in post-9/11 GI Bill funds. That's huge. So by targeting the lower income families and veterans, for-profit colleges get the federal government to guarantee the tab with loans, GI Bills, and grant programs. The Pell Grant alone constituted $7.9 billion for these institutions in 2010. That comes out to roughly $33 billion a year. It's no wonder then that 15 largest for-profit colleges chose to spend $3.7 billion, 23% of their budget, 23% of their budget on advertising. I don't even know what percentage of the budget Palomar College spends on advertising, but I can tell you it's not $23 million. 23% is a lot. And our budget's $100 million. That's why I say 20 million, 3 million. So nonprofit colleges usually spend about 1% of their budget towards advertising. I don't even think we spend that. So another problem with this is that graduate earnings are not rising as fast as their debt load. So here you can see student debt soaring, and because of the Great Recession, we've had the wages, the earnings of graduates going down. I hope I'm not depressing you. I want you to stay in school. We only have a few weeks left, but this is the reality. This is the reality. So, and then to just continue to depress you, currently there's $1.3 trillion in student debt, and $1.1 trillion is owned by the Department of Education. So they own your debt. You pay them. There are 41 million debtors, and 75% of the loans are co-signed by parents. Yikes. It's a profit deal. In 2013, the Department of Education gained $43 billion in profit. That's a lot. So why should I care? I don't have any student loans. I paid mine off a long time ago. Why would I even care about student loans? Anybody have an idea? Yeah.
Because they never go away. And
Yeah, but that sucks for you, but it doesn't bother me. Why do I care?
well, at one point or another, it's just basically sucking money out of the economy.
Sure it is.
Could be used to further K through 12 public education.
That, absolutely. And even beyond education, because of course, I love education. I'm a teacher. Obviously, I'm extremely biased. So, you got to consider the source. But there's another problem with this. Anybody have a clue? Some of my macroeconomic students? I'm looking at you, Bo. but I'm not going to call you. Anybody have an idea of why maybe this would be harmful for society as a whole? If young people come out of college and they're saddled with these huge, huge, huge debt loads?
Lowers consumption.
It lowers consumption. It lowers consumption significantly. You get out of college, you've got $400 a month that you're paying on your student loans. That's $400 you can't spend on other things. That's $400 you can't spend on a mortgage. Yeah.
If it lowers consumption, then why are big corporations backing it?
It's because they're different. You know, the big corporations that are backing this education reform, they're making money. Corporations are profit maximizers. They don't act as one in one group. They're profit maximizers. So Corinthian College isn't caring about Nabisco. They're only caring about Corinthian colleges. They say, we want to grab as much of this tuition as we can. And so they're profit maximizers, and that's exactly what they're doing, is profit maximizing. So this is an issue not only for students, not only for you people in the room, but for me, because someday I'm going to want to sell my house, and who am I going to sell my house to? You're not going to be able to because you have this great debt load, and that's a big issue for society, for our country. It's short-sighted, and it's wrong. And so to take this all home and explain how this happened and the system of education deformers is Shannon Lienhart. I am the deformer.
Okay, so they have to convince the public that schools are failing. And I'm sure you've heard this. Schools are failing. That's a myth. Okay, I'm not going to go into all of the evidence that that's a myth, but that's a myth. Our schools are not failing. Okay? Our teachers are not failures, all right? But they want you to believe that. So, and they have to get you to believe that so that you will then buy into the narrative that since the schools are failing, since the public schools are failing, we must need to have corporations come in and take over our school system. So one of the ways that they do that is they use standardized tests, okay? And the Common Core has been a big bone of contention for teachers, not necessarily because of the curriculum, which is broader and more robust, but because of the tests, okay? And they have set the bar so high on the Common Core tests that it creates failure. So it supports that failure narrative. So you can actually see that these are all the public schools in Maryland, I think. What's the big city? Baltimore, I think. The public schools. And you can see the exact time when the Common Core tests took place there, right? All of a sudden, immediately, teachers became horrible and students became dumber, right? Of course that did not happen. But the standards are set so high, it would be like saying, I want every high school student to be able to run a six-minute mile. You know what? There are going to be high school students that run 6-minute miles, but there's going to be a whole lot that don't run a 6-minute mile, and those students are not failures, right? So one of the problems with Common Core is that it does sort of, it identifies people and institutions and teachers as successes and failures with no gray area in there. Okay, so now at the community college level, we don't have standardized tests yet, all right? But there are other measures, and so there's been this huge advance in accountability. We have to be accountable for everything. So there's all this data that is being driven all the time, and reports to show accountability of what we're doing. In fact, so much money is being spent on all of this data gathering and accountability models, billions of dollars that actually could be going into opening up more classrooms, into the classroom. That money could be going into the classroom, but they're spending so much on accountability that they're robbing the classroom of that money. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of those. Here's one, the Student Success Scorecard, all right? So every college has a Student Success Scorecard. Now what you have to do is you have to read into that student success scorecard is what they're doing for each college is they say, well, this is the percent of students that graduated. This is the percent of students that made it through basic skills. Those are the kinds of measures that they have. Now, I will offer this idea is that it's defining success, right, in a very narrow way. And it's also going to, it's not so much about success as which colleges are failing, right? So really, when we talk about that failure narrative, is they have to have a measure to basically say which colleges are failing. And this is one of the measures that they're going to be using. Now, you know, last semester, I had a student in my classroom who had been shot in Iraq before he could even drink a beer. And many of his colleagues in Iraq had committed suicide. And that gentleman sat in my statistics class and did not pass, right? But I considered him to be a success because he did not kill himself, which was something he was struggling with, right? So there are so many measures of success. And we as teachers, we know that, right? We know that sometimes just coming to school every day is a success. Another measure of success that they, oh gosh, I'm going backwards. Okay, another measure of success right now is that they've just instituted is institutional effectiveness, right? Again, what this is going to show is it's going to show when the institutions are not effective. When they're not effective, that's a reason why you have to leave the public school system and start bringing in private corporations to run public schools. Oh, here is the granddaddy of madness in and of itself, okay? Student learning outcomes. They've been around for, I don't know, like 15 years, right? It is so much garbage. And I asked a friend of mine, said, did you just make up that chart? Because that's crazy. And I said, no, that actually came from a college website. This is what we're supposed to do. Now, every teacher knows that when you go in to teach a class, you decide what your students should learn. You assess what they learn, right? And then you walk out and you think, wow, I wish I would have given them another example, right? That's how teachers actually teach. And we don't need to go through this whole big bureaucratic rigmarole, which is seriously costing taxpayers billions of dollars with all the bureaucracy built around it, okay? It's insanity. So the bureaucratic nightmare is sucking time, energy, and resources out of our educational system. There's no money left for actual teaching, and they've also they're defining success and effectiveness in ways in which we, you know, as a culture, they're redefining the word success and effectiveness. Okay, they're changing what we always believed as being successful and effectiveness. Next, so strategy number 2. So strategy number 1 was to create a market and to create a need by saying that public schools were failing, okay? Strategy number 2 is to get rid of the opposition. So who is the opposition? Who wants to protect public education? Well, it's these guys, right? The teachers. The teachers are the ones out there on my free time, on these people's free time. This is our passion. We want to keep our public schools open because we believe that that's what's best for you, and we believe that that's what's best for society. But if the corporations want to get rid of our opposition, to silence us, to undermine the message that we have, to destroy our credibility, they put out a bunch of ads like this. Teachers are lazy, they're bad, they're incompetent, right? You have to get rid of tenure. You have to get rid of tenure is what they will tell you, because tenure protects bad teachers. Tenure does not protect bad teachers, okay? What tenure does is it gives me the ability to stand in front of you and give a message that might not be the same message that the powers that be want to hear, right? So if we were owned by Shell Corporation, or if we took money from Shell, do you think that there'd be any teacher on this campus who would be allowed to talk about climate change? That's what tenure does. Tenure gives us the ability to talk about controversial issues without fear of being fired. And it's an absolute necessity for our democracy that your teachers are able to talk the truth and speak the truth without fear of political or corporate pressure. So the other opposition to the corporate takeover is teachers' unions. So when so you will hear that the teachers' unions are bad, that somehow the teachers' unions are something outside of the teachers. The teachers' unions are all the teachers getting together, forming a union, and fighting for the things that they believe are best for public education. But the opposition wants to destroy our credibility, and so they will put out ads like this, which ran in USA Today. Clearly, the motivation of teachers' unions is to treat kids like garbage, right? That's what we're out there doing. We're not out there fighting to get more funding for our schools like Prop 30. That was absolutely what the teachers' unions were doing. We're not out there fighting to keep City College of San Francisco open, right? They want you to believe that what we're doing is we're treating kids like garbage. And their solution to that is you need to start suing us, right, for all the work that we're doing. Okay, so we've talked about the fact that they have to create a market, and they do that by ensuring that the public school system is failure. They have to silence the opposition. And the third strategy that I'm going to talk about is they have to create a production model for instruction. So they have to lower the cost of production. One of the ways they do that is like what Martin was talking about, was through online classes, right? Like these massively open online communities where the vision was to have an online instructor that would teach tens of thousands of people, and then you might have some low-wage tutor or instructional assistant that would help out. Those have been completely ineffective, but they're still trying it, right? Pearson Publishing is still trying to market online packages and online classes and so forth, and it's all about lowering the price of production. The other way that they lower the price of production is to get rid of any high-cost labor, right? So, yes, I'm a teacher and I make $1 million a year. That is not true. So, about 25 years ago when I got hired, 75 to 80% of the professors were full-time instructors. Full-time instructors get paid middle-class wages, we have benefits, and we have job security and tenure, right? Since then, about 20 years ago, what started happening was they started replacing full-time teachers with part-time teachers. Now, I want you to imagine this. I used to tell my students who came to me and said, I want to be what you are, right? I want to teach in a community college. And I would say, oh, it's a great job. It's a wonderful job, right? And now when students come to me and they say that, I'm like, don't do it. No, seriously, do not do that. Because most of the classes now, it's gone from 75 to 80% of the classes being taught by full-time teachers to now less than half of our classes are being taught by full-time teachers. Most of them are being taught by part-time teachers. A part-time teacher, if they teach a full load, right? They teach full-time. They have to travel from one college to another. They make somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000 a year. These are people with advanced degrees. These are people who have master's degrees and PhDs making $40,000 a year, and they're walking into your classes and they're teaching you. And some of them have to live in Tijuana because they can't afford to live here. And I know a few part-time teachers that live in Tijuana because they can't afford the rent here. $40,000 a year, you've got a PhD, you've got those student loans, right? Very few health benefits and absolutely no job security. That's what's happening. And the other way that helps the corporate mentality of education is because part-time teachers really don't have the same tenure protections as a full-time teacher. So if this college started to take money from Shell Oil, and Shell Oil said, you will not be talking about climate change, if I'm a full-time teacher, I'm going to be, yeah, I will, right? But if I'm a part-time teacher, I would probably not, because I'd be afraid I'd lose my job. Okay, so, but why? What is the motivation for all of this? It just seems like insanity, right? So clearly profit is the motivation. There is so much money in public education. It's a $700 billion industry, public education, and corporations want to capture that. And Pearson Publishing, I will say, you will never see me offering a book from Pearson Publishing, but then I started thinking, have I? No, I don't know. But I will not in the future. But profit is not the only motive. Some reformers are inspired by the desire to control the message. What gets taught in the classroom is the new front line in this battle. I know. They want to define college as simply job training for the masses, training that is fast, easy, cheap to produce, devoid of arts, literature, humanities, and so forth. They're not interested in developing critical thinkers. They're interested in turning out skilled industrial workers for their industry. Equally, if not more disturbing, is a push to redefine and reshape fundamental subjects like history and economics in order to drive a political ideology. The Koch brothers contribute millions of dollars to influential universities in America. They contributed $8.5 million to George Mason University, which lies 20 miles outside the center of Washington, D.C. Now they're saying it in public. Professor at Koch-funded university thinks we should have less democracy in our world. Our public education is being taken over by corporate interests at an alarming rate. If successful, we are looking at having a completely different world. The inequality gap will widen. Those with money will determine what gets taught and to whom. Education, which has traditionally been the great equalizer and fundamental protection of democracy, will be used to create profit for the rich and control what people know and understand about our world. Public education is democracy's last stand. And we need your help. We need your help in getting that message out.